Hi, and welcome to Binary Star Astrology. My name is Ingrid Arboin from Clan Mother Worldwide. On this channel, we talk about the Tycho model, which is a binary star geoaxial model of our solar system. Today, we're going to be exploring the Great Year. If you were to stay awake at night, lying at the top of an open-air observatory watching the sky, and if you were to fix your eyes on the North Star, the pole star, Polaris, situated at the end of the Little Dipper, you would see the Little Dipper spin around from the handle at the center. If you imagined it speeding up, going extremely fast, you might see it start to morph into a propeller, a windmill, a mill. You might name it the World Mill. And if you live a very long time, like one of those early Sumerian kings, a life of 25,000 years, you would watch that mill slowly move and fall apart. The handle would spin off to the side. Eventually the mill would look broken. Eventually another image would emerge, and another, until 12,000 years later, at the center, you would see a very bright, pretty star, and a bird flying and circling around it. That star would be Vega, and the bird Cygnus. To the observer, the night watcher, the astrologer, astronomer, and mythical storyteller, this was still a mill. It still spun. You might notice, as the mill broke down and took on new form and then broke down again, taking on another form, that each of those breakdowns seemed to define an age. A golden age would seem to be one period, another would be defined by a less golden age, you might think it a bit salty, and another would emerge that would be defined as a terrible time, a whirlpool of sand and rock. You might think, I need to share this with my children and future generations. So you would weave together a myth, and in it you would mark out the stars in shapes that would be easily identified. A dog, a king. You would put in numbers as part of the story. They would represent key cycles, numbers of years or months, and so on. This was the theory of the authors of Hamlet's Mill, that all myth was cosmological and meant for the transmission of the knowledge of the stars. Hamlet is Shakespeare's version of the Norse myth called Amlith. Hamlet is essentially the same myth, with some differences. At the beginning of their essay, Hamlet's Mill, the authors state this fact. In reading the rest of the book, you sort of wonder if they will return to Hamlet and make a deep connection or comparison to help us understand the use of Hamlet in this, or the use of the play in their essay, but they do not. In Hamlet's Mill, they show, however, that Amlith, the myth, is one that shows up across all cultures and times, and they hypothesize that Amlith and similar myths contain important information about the Great Year, the precessional year. In the Platonic version of it, the length of the year is 25,900 years. In our current general precession by the IAU, International Astronomical Union, the length is 25,772 years. And in the Tycho's model, Simon Shack has calculated the Great Year, called the PVP, Polaris Vega Polaris, to be 25,344 years. So basically the myth goes in Amlith that a king is killed by his brother, and then that brother becomes king. And the son of the king pretends that he's a fool, and he hides from his uncle so that the uncle doesn't kill him. The uncle, who's now the king, does all kinds of things to really figure out if he is a fool, if he is, not really capable of becoming a king. And so the story, the myth is filled with those kinds of details. In the end, Amlith is able to avenge his father's death, and he takes the throne. Now, in the myth, a mill is kind of a key factor in the story. And basically, it's a world mill. And this is something that kind of shows up and is present in many, many, many different myths all over the world. This mill, a mill showing the passage of time. And what happens is the mill is going and in the Amlith version, in the Norse version, the mill is producing gold and a golden age, and then it starts to break down, and then it produces salt, and then it breaks down, and then it produces sand and stone. And there's, of course, a couple of giant women running the mill. And this is something, a mill, this mill and the turning of the mill and the breakdown of the mill is something that shows up across all cultures. And so in their essay, they demonstrate how that happens. In Shakespeare, Hamlet is filled with doubt, and he doesn't avenge. He ends up dying. And his doubt is because of morality. He thinks about, the church and the whole morality around killing. And he wants to make sure that the uncle or, the uncle it's an uncle in Hamlet as well. It's the same story, but that the uncle is actually, Claudius, I think his name is, actually did kill his father. And so he has a lot of doubt and a lot of, he doesn't act right away. And in the end, he also dies. And so there's something a little bit different about Hamlet, this Shakespeare's Hamlet. Curiously, the story of Hamlet, fashioned after Amlith, is based on a Danish prince. And the play was first performed in 1602. And in 1601, Tycho Brahe dies prematurely. Tycho Brahe is the model. His model is the model of the solar system at the time, and his model does stay in existence for about 100 years. But his model does not have something in it to factor in or calculate the precession of the equinox. And so this is actually one of the things, the key thing that Simon Schack has come along and completed. He's taken Tycho Brahe's model and completed it, giving the Earth an orbit and accounting for precession perfectly. Now, when Tycho Brahe was doing his research, and he was methodical. He watched the stars, he recorded them. Everybody wanted his data, and he was very, very protective of his data. He hired someone. He hired Johannes Kepler. And he didn't give Johannes Kepler all of his data. He just gave him information about Mars to play around with and asked Johannes Kepler to come up with the reason why Mars behaved why it did. Now, we know that he already knew why Mars behaved as it did because he created a model that perfectly explains it. So maybe it was a way to test Johannes Kepler, who knows? But within a year of Johannes Kepler working with him, Tycho Brahe gets sick. He's at a banquet. I'm not sure if it's I think it's a wedding banquet he's at, and he gets sick and is poisoned. And they find within his body a lot of mercury to say that it was poisoning. There is another theory that his bladder burst, but he has been exhumed twice. And the reason he's been exhumed twice is because it is strongly believed that he was in fact murdered. So if he was murdered, what would be the motivation for a murder? In the play Shakespeare, There are two characters that sell out Hamlet. Well, they're meant to sell Hamlet out, and they are Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. And it just so happens that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are the names of Tycho Brahe's actual cousins in real life. And even more interesting is that the meanings of their name is, well, Rosencrantz means rose crown, and Guildenstern means either gold star or gold stone. And then they show up later on in the Rosicrucian Manifesto of 1616, called The Chemical Wedding of Rosencrantz. And the Knights of the Golden Stone do show up in the tale. So that's the name of the knights, Knights of the Golden Stone. So there is this interesting connection with Shakespeare, the play, connection to Amlith, and Tycho Brahe. And Tycho Brahe, the play Amlith being about the precession and about the cosmos, and Tycho Brahe being of Danish descent. There's just these overlapping similarities, and the names Rosencrantz and Guildenstern showing up in the play. So in the Norse tale, Amlith, the character, is taken by two similar characters named Finnar and Helgemar. Helgemar, I'm probably saying it wrong, with a note to the king in England. And the instruction to the king is to kill Amlith. But Amlith changes the letter and he puts the names of the two instead of his name. And when he gets to the English king, those two are killed. And this is what spurs him to avenge his father. He's now in a place to go and avenge his father, and he does. So this leads me to wonder if Hamlet was in fact an allegory, a truth hidden in plain sight, a 1500s conspiracy. And Tycho Brahe was a Dane, and his cousins were used in the story. And of course, the Norse myth is used, and the authors of Hamlet's Mill say that this is a transmission device about the nature of the precession of the equinox. And Tycho Brahe was killed, and his data taken to support the Copernican system. Did he discover something that the powers at the time did not want to be known? Perhaps the church. And the church had been pretty much lord of that age, lord of the age of Pisces. And at the onset of the age of Pisces, Jesus was born. And it was heralded by the stars. It was heralded by the Chaldeans, or the Chaldean priests. And on hearing this at the time, 2,000 years ago, Herod, it was prophesied that there would be a new king, and Herod sent out an order to kill all children under the age of 2, so that a child would not be born that would take the crown, basically. And so we all know the story. Jesus did live, but he was crucified at the age of 33. So this does kind of smack of the same kind of energy, as though there's a king not wanting to give up his crown, and he is trying to prevent another from taking the crown. And this is part of that Amlith story in talking about the ages. I debated whether I would put this in this video, and I reserve the right to remove it at some point if it feels right to do so. But I wanted to include this story because it's so interesting to me. Earlier on, I talked about Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, and I pointed to a paper that was an academic paper done by a professor at Penn State University. And in it, he argues that Amleth, or Hamlet, is actually a story because of the fact that Tycho Brahe's cousins were in it, and it involves Tycho Brahe and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, who were his cousins, that it is a medieval battle between the Danish camp and the British camp. And so the British camp would be Thomas Digges, who he mentions, and Tycho Brahe is the Danish. And actually, Thomas Digges was the assistant to John Dee, and John Dee was Queen Elizabeth's court astrologer and astronomer. And so last year, I was watching a video with Pam Gregory, and Pam, in this video, she was talking with a woman who speaks with blue beings. And I think this was probably her second video with this woman who speaks to blue beings. And Pam Gregory mentions to her that she has a memory of a past life being Thomas Digges. And I found it so fascinating because Pam Gregory speaks a lot about the Copernicus model and speaks about the likelihood of it changing and of it becoming something new and different. And I do believe her and many others are looking way out there beyond to the galaxy. And what we have forgotten to do is take the information that we've learned and apply it to our cosmos right now. So anyways, the argument is that there was a battle and basically the British camp won, or Tycho Brahe lost. Stick around because I'm going to go deeper into the Tychos model and into the turning of the ages, looking at the myths, looking at the Egyptian information, Sumerian information, Plato, and so on. And we're going to get deeper into this. So make sure to subscribe and stick around for part 2. You'll get notified. All right, take care.